A deadly skydiving crash is under investigation in Missouri. This happened in Butler, about 60 miles south of Kansas City.
At 11:27 in the morning of June 14, 2026, a Pacific Aerospace 750XL with the tail number of 221 Bravo November lifted off from Butler Memorial Airport in Missouri, and then within seconds, something terribly went wrong. The plane never gained altitude. It made a sharp left turn off of takeoff, and then it fell. All 12 people on board, 11 skydivers, and the pilots were killed, and the pilot, was killed. None of them made it out. Before we jump into this investigation, it's important, as always, to remember that we're dealing with a fatal accident here, the loss of 12 lives. This is an extremely tragic moment for the family, for the friends, for those who knew them. Absolutely devastating. So our heart goes out to them here at Ramos Law, Ramos Aviation. Make sure that we respect them and honor them first. For those of you that are new to the channel, let me introduce myself. My name is Joseph LoRusso. I'm the Director of Aviation here at Ramos Law. Now, professionally, I wear two hats. One as an ATP-rated professional pilot, two as an aircraft crash attorney. A balance of two when we look at investigations like this, and we dive into each wreck from a pilot perspective, but also from a legal perspective. So before we get into the details of the crash, we need to understand the airplane a little bit. To a lot of you guys, this is going to be a brand new airplane because it's very skydiving specific. This is the Pacific Aerospace 750XL. A lot of people call it the PAC 750 or the P750XL. In the skydiving world, it is a workhorse. It's the new twatter, essentially. It was designed and built in New Zealand, first flew in 2001. It received its FAA certification in 2004. And there have been a lot made since then. They've just been cranking them out since 2004. Now the XSTOL that you'll hear people refer to it as, the 750 XSTOL, stands for extremely short takeoff and landing. We know STOL is short takeoff and landing. The X is the extreme portion of it. And I will say the aircraft lives up to that name. So it can get airborne in under 800 feet. It hauls more than 4,000 pounds, even in hot weather. It's a great skydiving platform for quick ops, getting high, getting off the ground, and getting up and dropping people. Now the aircraft is powered by the Pratt & Whitney PT-6A. It's the -34 edition. That one's shaft rated at 750. Now this engine drives a variable four-blade prop, and as many of you know, the PT-6 is one of the most proven turbine engines in aviation history. A lot of people call it bulletproof. Just an absolutely stellar reliability record across decades of commercial and general aviation service. In the skydiving configuration of this airplane, so it's used in both cargo and skydiving. In the skydiving configuration, the airplane traditionally has 9 rear seats. Most of the skydiving ops will pop those out, and you can load up to 17 jumpers in there, depending on weights and all that. There is a large cabin door on the left side of the fuselage. That slides all the way up to the roof. It allows jumpers to exit cleanly, get away from the tail. Preferred skydiving platform for a lot of major operators, as we mentioned. 221 Bravo November, the aircraft that crashed, was manufactured in 2010. It's serial number 165. And it was operated by Skydive Kansas City, which is part of a company called Bucket List Experience. FAA records show that it had been flying actively in the days before the crash. Completed multiple sorties Friday, Saturday, and even the same day as the crash on Sunday morning before the crash. Now on the surface, if you were to just look at the flight history, flight tracks, all that, there's nothing in the aircraft's recent history that suggests that it would have been in distress or mechanically failing or something progressive in that nature. But of course, as you know, those of you who watch this channel, that really doesn't mean a whole lot when it comes to crash investigation. It's noted, but then after that, we're looking at this specific flight. Now, as we mentioned, this aircraft took off of Butler Memorial Airport. It's a small, uncontrolled general aviation airport about 60 miles south of Kansas City. There's no control tower. There was no air traffic control services being provided that morning. It's my understanding that the aircraft was leveling out before Class Alpha, before 18, therefore never needed to talk to anybody or announce drops. Those type of operations, especially in these remote areas, is entirely normal. So there's nothing, I know there's going to be a lot of people that say, well, why didn't they file a flight plan? What about the ATC recordings? That's not required in operations like this, and it's perfectly normal for them not to use ATC services. Now, on the morning, the 750 lined up on runway 36, 11 jumpers were aboard, plus the pilot. The load was probably at or near the aircraft's maximum gross takeoff weight of 7,500 pounds. As we mentioned, at approximately 11:27 a.m. local time, the aircraft began its takeoff roll. What happened next unfolded in seconds. So the plane lifted off, but it didn't climb normally. Witnesses called it at about maybe 100 feet on the high end. Witnesses who saw the aircraft take off recall something immediately happening, something immediately wrong with the airplane. The aircraft was not gaining altitude. The pilot made a sharp left turn, a hard left, the kind of turn that in our world and in the world of accident investigation and reconstructions, we generally recognize that as what we call the impossible turn, a desperate attempt to get the plane back to the runway, kind of the let me go home button, the reset button. Witnesses say as the pilot was coming around, they may have been aiming for a highway that was nearby, that was running parallel. But in any event, the aircraft just simply never made it. And at a low altitude with full gross weight and sufficient airspeed, it's more than likely that that plane stall spun as it pitched nose first towards the ground. Now, 221 Bravo November struck the terrain approximately 300 yards from the runway and burst into flames. First responders arrived quickly, extinguished the fire, but there's simply nothing they could have done. All 12 people were fatally injured. Emergency crews did search the entire area, and this is something that I'm sure we're going to hear in the comments. Emergency crews searched the entire area beneath the aircraft's flight path, looking for anybody who may have tried to get out, may have tried to jump. Obviously, everybody on board, all 12, had parachutes on board, but the aircraft really never got to an altitude in which a parachute could have deployed and put them under canopy safely. There was simply no way to bail. This is certainly one of the deadliest skydiving accidents in the United States in decades. But it's not alone. There's been several of these that have happened internationally with the 750. What's particularly sad about this one is the families of the skydivers were there, a lot of them. You know, they send their family member up in the aircraft, they wait at the drop zone for them to come under a canopy and take photos and all that. So unbelievably tragic that a lot of the jumpers' loved ones watched the airplane go down shortly off of takeoff. We do have a lot of witness statements because of that. And Dennis Jacobs is the acting airport manager at Butler Memorial, and he also serves as the Bates County Emergency Management Director. And he was one of the first officials to speak publicly about what he saw. He said in a statement to the news that the aircraft had just taken off and then made a left turn. He continued to say, in my opinion, I think it was losing power. And he was trying to make it over the highway and land. And then he stalled and went down nose first and caught fire. Jacobs called the scene, quote, brutal. Missouri Highway Patrol Sergeant Justin Ewing was also on scene. He was careful, as law enforcement and the NTSB are always in the early hours, not to speculate about what happened. But he said it's not quite known yet what factors may have contributed to the crash. Those details will be part of the investigation carried out by NTSB officials. Now, the NTSB were obviously on scene, as we've talked about in previous videos. They generally show up when there's a mass fatal event or fatalities in general or something that is very public to the news. In this case, we have all boxes checked. So the NTSB was there with the FAA in the early hours following the crash. Now, one former NTSB and FAA crash investigator spoke to the media and offered a real sober context for what may have happened. This individual said there's been a whole history of skydiving accidents for inadequate maintenance and a deficient safety culture. Now, that statement really cuts to the heart of a systemic problem that aviation regulators and investigators have flagged for, honestly, decades. This has been on the NTSB's hot list for a long time. They've reviewed accidents. In one of their roundtables, they reviewed 32 skydiving accidents between 1980 and 2008, and they found a reoccurring theme of shortcomings in maintenance, inspections of skydiving aircraft, and they found that there's generally lax pilot training programs for each operator. Now, they have asked the FAA to clean that up, Obviously, these skydiving operations are all about reps, right? They got to get the airplane in the air, on the ground, get more people on board, get the airplane in the air, on the ground. So it's always been kind of that battle of efficiency and safety in the eyes of the NTSB. And the NTSB has asked the FAA to clean that up since 2008. Now, of course, we're not saying that was the cause on this wreck. It's far too early to speculate. It's just something that we know from historical skydiving operations and the FAA and the NTSB investigating crashes similar to this. So that's something that we have to keep our mind aware of as we approach this investigation. As we mentioned, the NTSB has taken control of the investigation. They will own the wreck, as we call it in our industry. They are the only entity that is congressionally authorized to perform a crash investigation, but obviously they will recruit the FAA. The FAA will look for all the reg violations that could potentially be there with maintenance, pilot operations, all that good stuff. The NTSB will look at a causal factor. They'll produce a prelim in a couple of weeks. They'll produce a final, likely 24 to 32 months, if not longer, especially given the complexity and the amount of damage that we see on this wreck. Now, the big thing, investigators will tear down that PT-6A, the Dash 34, and they'll look for any sort of mechanical failure. In the past, we've seen turbine blade fractures or turbine blade mechanical issues that were not caught in maintenance. In similar wrecks internationally, they'll look for the fuel system and make sure that there's no anomalies, that it's operating correctly. They'll look for propeller control issues. And then, of course, they'll dive into the logs and support all their findings. Interestingly, though, they're going to look at ADs, right? They're always going to look at airworthiness directives regarding both the airframe and the motor. And there's at least one AD that's really, really interesting and of particular interest to this crash. So in 2019, there was an AD issued by the Civil Aviation Authority in New Zealand, obviously the manufacturer nation, the home nation of the PAC 750. And it required an inspection of the fuel condition lever. And that AD covers serial number 165 for 221 Bravo November. Now that AD was prompted by an accident that found the fuel control lever it basically sets the fuel control lever, brings the aircraft from the PT-6 from a ground idle to a flight idle, and it's part of the pre-takeoff checklist. The pilot will move the condition lever into flight idle from ground idle. And the investigative authorities found that could be inadvertently knocked into a fuel cutoff position because of its proximity with the flap control lever. So a pilot reaches for the flaps, inadvertently knocks the condition level. It goes back from flight idle to ground idle to fuel cutoff, killing the motor. So here's why that matters, obviously, with the PAC 750 that we're talking about now with 221 Bravo November. As I mentioned, that before takeoff checklist, as the pilot's taking the runway, they have to confirm that the condition lever is being set to flight idle, or high idle as it may be called. So if that is left in ground idle, if the condition lever is left in ground idle and not brought up to flight idle, the engine simply cannot produce full rated power no matter how far that throttle is advanced. So the pilot can firewall that throttle, but if they're not in a high idle, it is not going to produce adequate performance to get that airplane climbing. On a fully loaded aircraft at maximum gross weight, that performance penalty is catastrophic. So something to look at this one. Many reps, it's easy to go through flow checklists instead of actual checklists, and it is very possible to miss a ground idle to a high idle. Now, investigators will also look at the pilot training records. As I mentioned, that's why the FAA is there. They're going to look at checkouts on that type. They're going to look at any SMS or safety manual that the operator may have. They're going to look at any sort of training or recurrent programs that the operator may have for their pilots. Unfortunately, skydiving operations are flown under Part 91. They're not flown under 135. So there really is no mandatory standardized checklist or training requirements for skydiving ops, which is something that the NTSB has harped on the FAA about for many, many decades now. So whether this was a mechanical failure, a procedural error, a combination of both or many factors, we just don't know yet. But the pattern of skydiving aviation accidents in the United States suggests that when the answers come, they're going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be a lot of conversations about the industry. There's going to be a lot of conversations about the types of operations. And that's going to be very, very hard for a lot of the industry to hear, and certainly the families. Now, from the legal side of this crash is what we have to look at. This was in Missouri, Butler, Missouri. We have to consider waivers. A lot of skydiving companies will ask all their the jumpers to sign a waiver, which traditionally people think is you can't sue me, right? Hold harmless, indemnification. You knew what you're getting into. You cannot sue the operator. Now, in the state of Missouri, waivers are generally not held in favor. So, for example, in Missouri, you can't waive products claims. You cannot waive willful and wanton conduct. The waiver must be specific in detailing what negligence it covers. And the burden is on the operator, not the families, meaning the operator has the burden of showing the court the legal effectiveness and the specificity of that waiver on that negligent event. The family does not have to show how the waiver doesn't apply. The operator has to show why the waiver applies. But that being said, here's the big kicker. Waivers in Missouri do not blindly bind beneficiaries in wrongful death actions. Meaning, if somebody signed that waiver and went on that flight and unfortunately passed away, the family didn't sign that waiver, so the family is not bound and restricted from what that waiver would indemnify or hold harmless. That is a completely separate legal scenario. So something to think about in this case when we have 12 fatalities or 11 skydivers that potentially sign waivers, that waiver generally will not bind the family on any sort of wrongful death action. As those of you who watch this channel know, we also have the issue of GARA, the General Aviation Revitalization Act, which means aircraft manufacturers are not legally liable for aircraft that are older, beyond 18 years. The statute of repose of GARA is 18 years. Now, a couple things on that. One, GARA is traditionally extended to aircraft manufacturers that are based in the United States. However, there is some case law that expands that. So it's a point of contention, or at least argument, in the fact that the PAC 750 is made in New Zealand. So there's that argument, that rub of does GARA really apply? But then we're also talking about 221 Bravo November being a 2010 airplane. GARA has a statute of repose of 18 years, so we're within the repose. So this really now just puts us into likely Missouri being the venue of the crash, but we also have to look at all the different aircraft components which could have contributed to this accident. We're talking about, you know, the avionics suite, the Pratt, of course the manufacturer itself, and any interim component that could have lended itself to some sort of culpability, negligence, liability, all that stuff. And really, that is the type of things that aircraft investigators will look at, and certainly on the legal side that we'll look at to try and figure out, one, who is an appropriate party, if there is negligence, culpability, who's an appropriate party, and then what venue and jurisdiction will bring that claim in. As those of you who watch our video know, this is not something that we wait for the NTSB on. We can't use the NTSB's findings in court. We can't use it to evidence culpability. We can't use it to evidence liability. And we can't wait for them, right? Their report comes after likely the statute of limitations in most cases around the country. So we have to be running a parallel investigation. Time really is of the essence when we talk about crashes like this. Now again, it's important that everybody realize, I'd like to end the video this way, that this was a fatal crash. 12 individuals tragically lost their life. So be respectful of that when you're talking to the family. Be respectful of that when you're talking to friends, people that those who have been affected, loved ones. Make sure that you're being understanding, compassionate, empathetic, sympathize with them about what they're going through. This is the worst time in their life right now. Nobody and nothing preps you to lose a family member, friend, loved one in an aircraft crash. There's just nothing that readies you for that. So please be respectful of that. Our heartfelt apologies and sympathy goes out to all those affected by this crash. Hang in there. Take care of everyone during this time, and allow those who are affected to grieve.